Boker Tov. Today's Daf, Shavua Tov. Today's Daf is Daf Zayin in Zbachim. Daf Zayin. As we learn for Achim Kol Beis Yisrael and soon Batzar V'Shivya. Itmar. We're at the two dots about 10 lines down the page. Itmar. Toda sheshach l'shem todas chavero. Let's say you shechted a toda, you slaughtered a toda for somebody else's toda. Now, this is not shini bailam, says Rashi. Shini bailam is where you had a kavana that the other person is going to be mechaper. You shechted Ruvain's carbon so that Shimon should be mechaper. We're not talking about that. We're talking about a kind of a shinui kodesh, but it's within the same category. One toda for somebody, they shechted Ruvain's toda for somebody else's toda. Rav Amar Kshever, Rav Chista Amar Psula. Machlokas here. Rabba says it's kosher, as we'll see why you give a reason. Rav Chista says it's puzzle. It's shinui kodesh. Rabba Amar Ksheira, so I total the same Torah nishchata, we shechted for a Torah. Similarly to what we find elsewhere, we had it before, we're going to mention it again, that if I have to bring two karbanos of chatas, one's for chatas chayla, one's because I ate chayla by mistake, one's inadvertently, one's because I ate dam inadvertently, I drank dam inadvertently, so that's where I shechted a chatas l'shem, a different chatas. Could be that's kosher. So Rabba says similar to this. Rabba Amar Ksheira, total l'shem Torah nishchata. Says Rashi about 2/3 of the way down in the page, a little bit after the halfway point. Says lo sheshach l'manashi skaper ba mishena bal, right? Because that's shini bailam. Remember, shini bailam is only when you had a kavana that the kapara, meaning the dam, should be for the other guy. Here he didn't have that. Eli shirka shaisel Reuven toda. Reuven had a toda and Shimon had a toda cheres. And this is what we mean. It's similar. Rashi, some take out the girsa. It's similar to shochet chatas chel l'shem chatas dam. So Rabbah says it's okay. Rav Chista says it's puzzle. L'shem shlomim d-day b'inan. You have to shecht it for your own. Meaning, again, total l'shem toda nishchata. Rabbah says it's no good. Rav Chista says, Rabbah says it's okay. Meaning it's kosher. It's 100% kosher. And you're yotzei, right? He says that's mamish okay. Rabbah says ksheira, Torah says, Rav Chista says it's no good, right? Rabbah says, okay, why? Total same Torah ishchata. It was sechta for a Torah. Somebody else's, but it's still a Torah. And you didn't have a kavanah for that somebody else should have a kapara. Rav Chista Amar Psula, why? L'shum shlomim d-day b'ina. He's got to have it for your own carbon, for your own shlom. Torah is a kind of a shlomim. Amar Rabbah. Now, Rashi and Tosfos disagree here whether the machlokas Rabbah and Rav Chista is only about Toda, or is it about other kabbalas? Rashi says his proof is from Toda, as we'll see in a second. Therefore, he brings it from Toda, but the truth is it applies to other kabbalas also. Tosfos says no, it's dafka talking about Toda because that's where you have the pasuk, not elsewhere. Amar Rabbah, we're about 18 lines down on the page, I would say, beginning of the line. Amar Rabbah, where do I get this idea that if you shechted Reuven's Toda for Shimon's Toda, and there's a kavanah for Shimon's Toda, not that Shimon should have a kapara, but it was for the other animal, like a shinkosh Tanya. Ubasar zevach Torah shlama b'yamakiva zivcho. It says basar zevach Torah shlama. Remember we used this pasuk. Teach me that it's got to be l'shem l'shma. We used it the other day when we were talking about how do you know l'shma. So abachanan am shema b'lezer ba'olame Torah sheshach l'shem shlamim kshera, because it says zevach todas shlama. Toda is a kind of a shlamim. If I shechted a Torah l'shem shlamim, it's okay. Shlom shenish l'shem Toda psulim. That's no good. If I shech the shlom shem Toda, why? Because Toda is a subset of shlomim. It's a kind of shlomim. Not all shlomim are Todas, but all Todas are shlomim. What's the difference? As we said, Toda, Kriya Shlom, Toda is called a shlomim. It's a kind of a shlomim. It's a subset. It's a category, subcategory of shlomim. One of the kinds of shlomim is a Toda. It has different particular characteristics to it, but it's a kind of a shlomim. They're both kachem kalam. The ain't shlom kurim Toda, but a shlom is not called a Toda. Shlom are different kinds of shlom. A Toda has to be a certain kind of an animal. It's got to have breads with it, etc. It's all eaten for a day and a night. Shlom is different. Shlom l'shem Toda psula. So again, Rabbah goes on. Shlom l'shem Toda psula. Ha Torah l'shem Toda kshera. That's Rabbah's diak. That's how Rabbah deduces that Toda l'shem Toda is okay. Why? He says shlom l'shem Toda. That's puzzle. Mashma Toda l'shem Toda is kosher. My love, the chavreitz mashma, even if it's somebody else's Toda. When you shechted Reuven's Toda, you had a kavanah for Shimon's Toda. So it's mashma, even somebody else's. So Rav Chista will answer, lo, the day, only his own. If you shechted your own Toda for another Toda, let's say, for example, you did two things. You came out of the hospital and you wanted to bench goma for that, bringing a Toda, and you also took a plane ride over the ocean and you went out to the ocean, you went out on a cruise and you came back safely, you want to bring a Toda for that too. So when you brought a Toda for the first one, you were thinking of the second one. That's what we mean. Hadi date. If you brought one Toda for another Toda, that's okay. Same thing with the Chatas. Aval Chavrei, but if you brought Reuven, if you shechted Reuven's Toda for Shimon's Toda, my psul, that would be possible. So if that would be the case, you want to say that's possible. So why did he tell me that Shlom L'Shem Toda is no good? Tell me even Toda for somebody else's Toda is no good. Adatani Shlom L'Shem Toda, psul. Why tell me Shlomim L'Shem Toda is possible? Why? Because not all Shlomims are Todas. Listen, Toda L'Shem Toda. Tell me Toda L'Shem Toda is no good if it's for somebody else. If the Kolshkein Shlom L'Shem Toda says no. Shlom L'Shem Toda Didei Yitzrach. You're right. Toda L'Shem Toda, somebody else's Toda, Rav Chisda will say that's no good. Right? Rabbah says it is okay. But Rav Chisda says that's a good. Toda L'Shem somebody else's Toda. So why don't you just, that's no good. But the Chiddush is that Shlom L'Shem Toda Didei is no good. Of course, if my Toda for your Toda is no good, certainly my Toda for your Shlomim is no good. But the Chiddush is that my Shlomim for my own Toda is no good. That's a Chiddush. That's what we're going to say. Shlom L'Shem Toda Didei Yitzrach. Sometimes I might think, Mida Toda Kuri Shlom, since Toda is called Shlomim, because Toda is a kind of Shlom. Shlom is also Nami Korean Toda, because Shlom could be called Toda also, because there's one kind of Shlom, which is a Toda, but it's not, a Shlom in general is not called a Toda. I might think that it would be, that it's no good. So we have this machlokas Rabbah and Rav Chisda, whether you shechted my Toda for your Toda, whether that would be good or not. But everybody would agree that my Toda for my Toda is okay, my Chatas for my Chatas is okay, a different kind of a Chatas Chel for Chatas Dam, or Toda for the ocean versus Toda for coming out of the hospital, or whatever your salvage was, whatever you were saved from. Amarava. Okay, here we had this before. We mentioned this before, that if you shechted a chatas for another chatas, Rashi in the fourth of the wide lines gives us the exact interpretation. That's kosher. That's kosher. Rava says chatas, your own, right? Not necessarily for somebody else. If somebody else is no good. It's got to be for your own. But for your Rava chatas, shechach l'shem chatas ksheira. Now, according to Rabbah, the way Rashi learned Rabbah, that we started out with, maybe a chatas for somebody else's chatas would be okay if you didn't have kavanah for the kapara. You just said, two chatas here, Reuven's and Shimon. I shechted chatas, Reuven's by mistake for Shimon. But according to Rabbah, that would be okay. According to Chisda, it wouldn't be okay. And that's only according to Rashi. According to Tosas, Rabbah is not talking about chatas; it's only talking about Toda. Okay, so chatas shem chatas kshera l'shem ola psula. If I shechted a chatas shem ola, that's puzzle. Where did we have that before? In the very first Mishnah in the Masechet. Remember, what did we say? All karbonos that you shecht for with a kavana of shini kodesh or shini bailam too. We're not talking about shini bailam mishra kodesh. If you did it shalol lishma, it's kosher. Except you're not ola, you're not yotze. You got to bring another one. Except for chatas and pesach, which are no good. You know, if you shecht the chatas for shalol lishma, that's no good. So if you shechted a chatas l'shem ola, the Mishnah says clearly that's puzzle. Totally, you got to throw it out. My time, it says v'shachat osa l'chatas. You got to shecht it for a chatas. Only l'shem chatas, nothing else. Am rachmana. But a chatas l'shem chatas nishchata. Oh, so why? What's the reason why if I shechted a chatas for a chatas, that's okay? Because I shecht chatas. L'chatas, am rachmana, but a chatas l'shem chatas. If I shechted a chatas chela for a chatas dam, I did shecht it for a chatas. It says v'shachat osa chatas. I was yotzei. L'shem ola psula, but that's no good. Why? Because it says, as we said, because it's got to be chatas. The Gemara is going to talk about that on tomorrow's daf. The Gemara is going to talk about how do we know that a chatas that you shechted for something else, right? That if you shechted it for something else, it says shachar osa l'chatas. It's got to be dafka l'chatas, nothing else. We mentioned this pasuk also the other day on Hey Amar Aleph. Pasuk shachar osa l'chatas osa l'shmak shevet. Dafka that has to be l'chatas. It's got to be chatas, not. First, not a chatas, but if I shechted it for a chatas, even if it was another chatas, it was still a chatas. I was yotze chatas. The shachar osa l'chatas. I'm rachman v'chatas. Shem chatas. The shem ola psula because it's not a chatas. Okay, that's what Rava said. Number one, Amar Rava chatas shechta al misha mechuyev chatas psula. Again, if I shechta a chatas al misha mechuyev chatas for somebody else's. Wait a minute, didn't we just say, according to Rava, the way Rashi learned Rava at the beginning of the daf, that if I shechted Reuven's chatos, Hashem Shimon's chatos, that's okay. But here Rashi explains, take a look at Rashi, 5-6 lines 6 lines from where the wide lines start. Al misha mechuyev chatas b'shinui bailam al manas lizruk dama l'shem chavera mechuyev chatas kamoso. If I shechted Reuven's chatas so that Shimon should have a kapara with his rika sadam, that was my kavana. That's no good. Okay, you understand? So if I shechted my chatas, I had to bring 2 chatas, and I brought one for another one. That's okay. If I shechted l'shem ola, that's shini kodesh. That's no good. Shechlas al chatas. Okay. If I shechted my chatas though, for somebody else who's mechuyev achatas, so he should have a kapara, that's puzzle. That's shinui bailam. That's shinui bailam with a kavana, a bad kavana. I had kavana. I shechted Reuven's chatas so that Shimon, who is also chayev achatas, should have a kapara with this one. That's puzzle. Listen to this though. Let's say I'm chayev achatas. I'm bringing achatas for Reuven and Shimon rather. Reuven's chayev achatas. Shimon's chayev an ola, a different carbon entirely. He's not in the same category. And I shechted chatas so that Shimon should have a kapara for his with he's a kapara. Shimon's not chayev chatas; he's chayev an ola, right? He's chayev an ola. So if I shechted Shimon's Reuven's chatas with a kavana that Shimon should have a kapara, it's okay. Why is it okay? Because he's b'chlal not in the parsha of chatas. He's not chayev chatas. Understand? Again, look inside. Chatas shechted al misha mechuyev chatas puzzle. If I shechted, if Reuven and Shimon are both chayev chatas, and I had kavana when I shechted Reuven's chatas that Shimon should have a kapara, no good, right? That's shini kodesh, shini balam rather, shini balam. And as we'll see, shini balam even by the eved by chatas is no good. As we said, chatas shechted shalol lishma, whether it's shini kodesh or shini balam, is puzzle. But al misha mechuyev ola. But if I shechted something for somebody who's chayev and ola, he's not in the parsha of chatas at all. I'm shechting my chatas that Reuven's chatas that Shimon should have a kapara. Shimon's not chayav chatas, and it's kosher. My timer. Why? Because the pasuk says v'chiper love when it says that you have kavanah for Reuven. Reuven should have an atonement. V'chiper love lo chaver only for Reuven, not for Shimon. But chaver d'midei, it's only if Shimon is chayav something like Reuven, similar to him, b'mechuyev kapara kamoso. If Shimon's chayav chatas and Reuven's chayav chatas, and I had kavanah when I shechted Reuven's that Shimon should have a kapara, that's no good. But if Shimon's not chayiv an ola chatas at all, there's nothing wrong with what I did. He's not. It's meaningless what I did, and that I changed it for Shimon. Shimon's not in the parsha. It's like I don't know, like a Jew and a non-Jew. He's not in the parsha at all. Amarava chatas shachta misha ein mechuyev klum. Let's say you shechted a chatas for somebody who's not chayiv anything. What would you say there? Well, he's not chayiv a chatas. Right? Not chayav achatas, and we just said if you're not chayav achatas, and I shechted for somebody who's not chayav achatas, shouldn't be bad. No, it says it's still psula. Why? Shein l'chadam b'Yisrael, shein l'mechuyev asay. There's no Jew who's not chayav an asay, meaning he didn't do some mitzvah asay that he should have done, or mitzvah asay shenitikli asay. All of us are guilty of something, and therefore he says, so what? So what? But he's not chayav achatas. Yes, but achatas could atone for somebody who's chayav an ola too, as we're going to explain in a minute. What do it mean? If Reuven's chayav chatas and he set aside the chatas, and Shimon's chayav an ola and he set aside the ola, and you shechted Reuven's chatas so that Shimon should have a kapara, that's okay because Shimon's got his ola. It's meaningless. Your kavana about the chatas for Shimon is meaningless. But if Shimon didn't set aside an ola, and everybody's chayav an ola, then when Reuven so he didn't set aside one, then Reuven's chatas could atone for Shimon in some way because he doesn't have an ola. He didn't set aside an ola for that. That's what he explains now. The Amarava chatas mechaperos al chayve essay ikav v'chomer. A chatas is mechayev on a chayve essay, which the Torah doesn't prescribe that, but it's mechayev ikav v'chomer. A chayve krisis mechaperos. If the chatas mechayev on chayve krisis, let's say for you ate chaylev, if you did it b'mezik, you're chayev kares. If you did it b'shogi, you're chayev chatas. So if it's mechaper on chayve krisis, al chayve essay l'kolshkin, certainly should be mechaper for that too. Lemeimer de basmina. Are you saying that it's the same category? Says Rashi, the asay basmina. Are you saying that an asay is in the same category as a chatas? That a chatas, which is normally mechaper for a chayve krisis, should also be chayv an asay. V'amarav a chatas sheshachta misha mechayv chatas psula. We just said a minute ago. If you shechted a chatas for it that said Reuven chatas said Shimon should have a kapara. That's possible. You see that they're not in the same category. If it's chayv and ola because he'll say nachavela. The answer is like we said the other day on Friday. Mikivela mechaper. It's not mechaper absolutely, but mikufi mechaper. It's got a floating kapar, meaning it chapers a little. And Mashi explains that a chatas, if I'm chayv and a chatas, and you're chai, if Reuven's chai v'chatas and Shimon's chai v'nasei, so they each bring their own category. So the chatas is not normally machaper on the asay, and always machaper on the asay. But if I didn't set aside, if the person's chayiv an ola doesn't bring an ola, but everybody's chayiv an ola, everybody's chayiv an ola for an asay, so then the chatas could be mechaper for him. Let's say he brought a chatas for some other sin that he had, could be mechaper on the asay too. Normally an asay, an ola is mechaper, and a kares chatas mechaper. But let's say I had to bring a chatas, I'm chayiv a kares for something. And I'm also chayiv and asay for something. The chatas can be mechaper that too. Says the second Rashi on the page. Second Rashi on the bekufi mechaper. Hilkoch al mishum mechuyev ola ksheira. Chayiv and ola is ksheira. Why? Even the hifresh ola shaycha kula esa should be ola. If Reuven's chayiv chatas and Shimon's chayiv and ola, so all Shimon's sins, he's only chayiv and ola for asays, are going to be taken care of by his ola. If you had kavanah when you shechted Reuven's chatas to be mechaper for Shimon says I have nothing to do with that. I have my own ola. I'm already covered. I'm covered by my own ola, right? Besulo shaya chatas gebei. The chatas has nothing to do with Shimon. Avo mi shelo hifresh. The third line of Rashi from the top of the page. Avo mi shelo hifresh klum. But if the person was chayiv and ola wasn't mechayiv anything. Everybody has an aveir v'asei. You could have done this. You could have given stock. Or you could have put on tefillin. You could have done something. You're always chayiv for something. Shaya chatas gebei. Deal whom is chayiv, have him chayiv. If it's chayiv chatas, machaper asay mikufia. The asay is also machaper. In other words, if I'm everybody's chayiv to bring an asay all the time, right? But I didn't set aside an ola for that, right? Chayiv for an asay. But I brought a chatas machaper for my terrible sins. It's going to be chayiv for my light sins as well, for my less stringent sins as well. So machaper say mikufia, it'll flood. Hilka chayil shmei chataso shenishchol shmol leposla. So therefore, if Shimon is not Shimon, who's always chayiv, we're always chayiv and ola. Everybody's chayiv on some asay that they didn't perform. So if Shimon didn't set aside a carbon for him, then the chatas of Reuven could go on him. And if you had a kavana when you brought Reuven's chatas that Shimon should have a kapara, that's no good. That's no good. It's the wrong guy. It's Shini Balaam. But if Shimon had his own carbon ola, I don't need yours. Shimon says to Reuven, I don't need yours. You had kavanah for me, it's meaningless. Therefore, the chatas that you brought for Reuven is okay. That's what we're talking about when you had Shini Balaam. So again, we have all these different categories. We started off by saying, if I shechted with Shini Kodesh, my toda for my other toda, everybody would guess, okay, it's machlokas if my toda for your toda is good or not. That's by Shini Kodesh. By Shini Balaam, we said, chatas shech l'shem chatas ksheira, right? For my own sin, a different sin, chaylev and dam, that's okay. The shemola puzzle, because you have to bring your own. If you're not chayiv, if I shechted my chatas for l'shem ola with a shinu kodesh, here we're still talking about shinu kodesh, that's puzzle. Why? Because chatas for chatas is okay. Chatas for ola is no good. If it's talking about shini balam, where I had kavanah with my chatas to be mechaper for you, then if you're chayiv a chatas like me, that's no good. If you're chayiv an ola and you have your ola, then my words are meaningless. But if you have your ola, if your ola, you didn't bring an ola for your sins, for your asays. You just, you could be covered by chatas, then it would be a problem. That if my chatas would cover your asays, then it's no good. Then it's shini bala. Says the Gemara, the Amar Rav on the second line on the days. Amar Rav, ola shach l'shelo lishma. We already learned that if you shecht an ola shelo lishma, what's the halacha in the Mishnah? First Mishnah, it's kosher, but the baham's not yotze. You got to bring another one. Still, if I messed it up once, this is really a repeat. We had this Gemara on Beis Amud Aleph. Also, even though I shechted it shelo lishma, and I could go on, it's really, I'm not yotze, but it's kosher. So do you say, since I shechted it shelo lishma, I could be zork the dam shelo lishma too? Might as well. I messed it up once, I'll mess it up again. Like you ate on a fast day, I might as well eat a little bit more. What's the difference? I messed it up already. No, you don't say that. You shouldn't be zork the dam shelo lishma. Why? Either based on a pasuk or based on a svar. Moses was achatishma vasisa. We said, right? Is it a neder or is it a nedava? If I messed up my neder, it becomes a nedava. So therefore, just because it's and a nedava, you can't mess up. In other words, once I messed up my neder by bringing it shelo lishma, my ola shelo lishma, I messed it up. Okay, so it's still a nedava. That's what we learned. Nedava, you shouldn't mess up a nedava. Just because you made one mistake, you made a difference, you change it. Should you change it even more? Like we saw Daf Beis, we explained the same thing. Same Gemara. Let's say Reuben set aside an ola and he died, and his sons, they bring it in his place. Remember, if it was a chatos, what's the rule? Chatos shemesa baleh, you let it die. Ola, he could bring it, right? So let's say he bought lacher misa, shachta b'shini kodesh. If you made a mistake, what, and you brought it now, you ola, let's say l'shem shlamim or l'shem chatos, psula. What do you mean psula? It's not really puzzle. Not puzzle entirely. It's kosher except ola b'am shem chova. This is the case of an ola you bought shalol lishma. An ola shalol lishma, it's kosher, just you're not yotzei. So Achmisa Shach Mishin Kodesh Psula. Psula again doesn't mean puzzle entirely. Rashi says, well, also Sarach Yosh, he's got to bring another one in its place. He didn't do a good job taking care of his father's estate. His father in the estate left over an ola, should have brought it as an ola, not as a shlomim. Bishini Balam, let's say he brought it for somebody else. Now, who is the Balam over here? The guy, the deceased, Reuben, right? But he bought it for Shini Balam, he bought it for somebody else. That's kosher, even though normally Shini Balam would also be not Yotzei, but here's Ksher. Why? The Ein Baal Machamisa. There is no owner. The owner's dead. And therefore there is no Shini Baal, according to the first opinion. That's what Rava said. Rav Pinchas Brei Rav Ami says he disagrees. Amar Yesh Baal Machamisa. No, even after death, he's the deceased is still the owner. Does that what he means? The deceased is still the owner? What do we mean by that? Amalei Rav Ashler Pinchas Brei Rav Ami. Dafka Kamarmar? Did you mean Dafka Yesh Baal Machamisa? And what does that mean? That it really belongs to the deceased. So if you brought it for somebody else, for an uncle instead of your father, is that what he means? And you brought it, you're not Yotzei. In other words, even though your father died and you brought it in his place, and you brought it with a Shini Balam, you brought it for somebody else, right? What do we say normally? Does that mean you're not Yotzei? Yesh Baal Machamisa, and you're not Yotzei, and you got to bring another one for your father now? Odilma just means this. Yesh Baal Machamisa, Di'ika Kama Asega Be'machaper. Maybe means this. Who is the owner after death? The son. The son's Yoresh. And maybe it means this. The son, the father left over an ola that he was chayiv to bring, right? The father died now. He doesn't need any more kapara. Now it belongs to the son. So if the son had other aveiros, he didn't put on tefillin, didn't put on tzitzis, whatever it was, an asay thing, maybe that's what it means. He's yotze with that. That the son is now yotze, that if he has other asays, omelei dafka kamina. So Rav Pinchas Brei Rav Marty explained, I meant dafka, meaning he's got to bring another one. That right, there was a machlokas here. Rava says if you bring an ola for your deceased father, your father died, he had an ola. He didn't get a chance to bring it. You bring it for him. You got to bring it properly. Rava said, okay, yeah, but if you bought it with Shini Balam, it's kosher, right? It's kosher anyway because there is no Shini Balam. After death, there is no really Balam, so therefore there's no Shini Balam, Achar Misa. That's what he meant. Shini Kodesh, yeah. If you bought it for a different carbon, then you'd have to bring another one. But if you bought a Shini Balam, there's no Shini Balam, the guy's dead. But Pinchas says, no, there's still a Balam, Achar Misa, and if you brought it with a Shina Balam, you'd have to bring another one in its place. Dafka Kamina, you have to bring another one. Velmarava. Right. He's not really, he doesn't need a kapara anymore, but the carbon is still there, and it's an obligation on the son to bring it. It's an obligation on the son to fulfill his father's obligation, even though he doesn't need the kapara anymore because he's dead. Velmarava. Ola, what is an Ola? Ola is really Doron. It's really a gift. Doron, right? Doron is a gift, right? Ola is a doron, is a gift. What do we mean by that? We mean that it's not really brought as a kapara, as an atonement. We talked about if you're over nasei, and you got to bring an ola, right? You didn't put on tefillin, you should bring an ola, right? But it's not really a kapara for that. We'll see why. Either like a tshuva, if you didn't do tshuva, you didn't repent, so zevach rishon to'eva. You can't bring a carbon anyway. What do you mean? I didn't repent. I didn't care. I didn't put on tefillin, but I'll bring the carbon anyway. Yaitza. No, if you didn't do tshuva, your carbon is worthless. Tshuva's got to be in your heart. If you didn't do tshuva in your heart, the carbon doesn't mean anything, right? In fact, it's an abomination. The carbon of Russia who didn't repent is an abomination. If you did tshuva, you don't need the carbon. Let's say you were over in a mitzvah, you didn't put on tefillin or tzitzis, or you didn't do some other mitzvah, didn't do tzedakah, b'shav, and you did tshuva. Lo zaz mishamat shemochen lo. In heaven, they forgive him immediately as soon as he did tshuva. So what do you need the carbon for? Ela shma min adoron. It's simply a gift. We see it in a gift. We see it as a gift. Why is a chatas broad? What do you mean lama ba? Why is a chatas brought? L'chaper. It's brought to atone. Ela lama ba lifnei ola. Wherever we find, we had this the other day too. Rashi points it out here as well. Rashi says that it's brought wherever. The question is this: not lama ba lifnei ola. Whenever you have a chatas and an ola, even if it's two birds, or a chatas bird and an ola animal, even you have to bring both of them. Why is it brought before the ola? Lepraklit should be like an advocate. Right, shenichnas. There's a person sinned against the king, so first he sends in his advisors, his advocate, to beseech the king to talk to him nicely. Then after he reads a proclit, once the proclit has pacified the king, right, he softened him up. Afterwards, you bring the gift in. You don't just walk in with you. What's the gift for? What are you doing? No, first I want to apologize and I want to show that I atoned. Then afterwards, you bring the gift, and that's what the ola is for. The ola, again, without atonement, the ola is worthless. And with atonement, you don't need the ola. The ola is a gift brought in afterwards. Okay.
Ladies first. The chatas before the ola.
The chatas before the ola, right? Chatas is usually in the kippah. Correct, right? Good, very good, right? Except the ola, it could be. You're talking about birds, where the birds there is no.
Only with birds.
Oh, no, not with birds. With birds, there is no difference in zachar and nekeva. Right. Okay, so now we go back to the Mishnah. The Mishnah said that all kabbanas that you brought shalol lishma, and then we're talking about basically shini kodesh, but it could be with shini balam too, as we'll see. But shini balam is different because shini balam is only works where you have a kabbana that you're going to be zorg the dam, be mechaper for somebody else. But either way, they're kosher except you're not yosei. You go on with the carbon except pesach and chatas. If you bring a chatas or a pesach shalol lishma, you throw it out. It's no good. Now, how do we know that? Pesach minolan. Now, let's recall something. The other day we had, how do we know that everything has to be l'shma? We said right at the beginning, minolan on Daf B'Dalet, we talked about how do you know l'chadchila? We said Moses Sechet teaches me what? That if I bought a neder, shalom lishma, right, and then have shalom, it still becomes an adapa. Okay, but but how do I know l'chadchila you have to have lishma? So it's learned out from Zos HaTorah Lo Min Chasham. We learn out from Shlomim. Psukim by Shlomim, the what? From El Zevach Shlomim, etc., from El Nazir or other Shlomim, that has to be Lishma, right? How do we know all the other ones? Pasuk says they're all hookish to one another. So Lishma. But now Pesach and Chatas are not just Lishma. Even B'diavad, they have to be Lishma. Meaning, if you did it Shelo Lishma, it's possible. How do we know? So we'll talk about Pesach today, Chatas tomorrow. Pesach Manolan, it says Shamar es Chodesh Aviv. Guard the Chodesh Aviv. That's how we know that Pesach also will be in the springtime. The Asisa Pesach. She calls the Pesach. Whatever you do, all the procedures have to be l'shem Pesach. Okay. Ashkan Shini Kodesh. If I had Kavana Bar Pesach, let's say l'shem Shlomim or l'shem Ola, no good. Okay, that's Shini Kodesh. Shini Baal. How do I know Shini Baal? Got another pasuk said by Martam Zevach Pesach. Who? It's got to be Pesach, nothing else. Shetei Zvicha. I shecht Zevach Pesach. The Shchita has to be l'shem Pesach, right? The Shchita has to be l'shem Pesach. And mainly in Shini Kodesh, we already know Shini Kodesh that everything has to be by Shini Kodesh. We saw all the procedures have to be l'shma. It's got to be l'shem Pesach. All right, so here we talk about Zvicha, the slaughtering of the Pesach. It's not for Shini Kodesh because we already know Shini Kodesh from the previous pasuk. So Shini Kodesh, so we're going to say Shini Ba'alim. So if I shechted with a kavana that the different owner will be Yotzei, will have a kapara, that's how we know that that's no good. Ashkel mitzvah. That's we go on lechatchila la'akaminal. Here I think for the first time we mentioned it before, but this is the first time we see it in the Gemara. That when it comes to kachim has a different rule. When it tells you got to put on tefillin, you got to put on tefillin. It doesn't have to tell you twice. When it comes to kachim, we have a rule. If it says it once, that's la mitzvah. That's lachatchila. La'akav, if it should be that it should be indispensable, that that you can't not do it. It's got to be lachatchila. You can't if you didn't do it, it's no good. That's la'akav. By kachim, you need a special pasuk for that, a second pasuk. So with the first pasuk tells me you got a mitzvah. How do I know another pasuk that's la'akav, that it's ma'akav? If you didn't do it, you're not yosei at all. The whole thing is no good. It's puzzle. Amarkrav zavachta pesach is another pasuk. The zavachta pesach l'shem lakecha. So this teaches me that mitzvah that la'akav by both bailam, shini bailam, and shini kodesh is zavachta pesach another pasuk. Maskul of safra. This last pasuk of a zavachta pesach l'shem lakecha, it says zavachta l'shem pesach l'shem lakecha sonu vakar. Now, a carbon pesach is brought how? Male or female? Male. What species? Lambs or goats. Can't bring a cow. Can't bring a heifer for carbon pesach. But it says pesach. It says sonu bakar. What's going on? You think the zavachta pesach was come tell me that what? That shini kodesh or shini ba'alim, it's ma'akav if you had a kavanah shlo shma. Haimi boile look Rav Nachman, use it for Rav Nachman's Rosh. Rav Nachman, Amar Rav Bar Avua, Menayin lemosa Pesach shekosher. How do we know that the remainders of a Pesach are shalom? What do we mean a remainder? So the classic case is they brought a Pesach, got lost, and ran away. The little lamb ran away. I couldn't find it. Brought another one in its place, and now I found the original one. I found the plumb, I found the original one on there. What do you do with it? It's a shlomim. Same thing with the Pesach any other day of the year. Pesach not on the 14th day of Nisan becomes a shlomim. How do I know? Shenemar, so it says, V'zavachta Pesach Shem Lekechat Sonu Bakar. What do you mean Sonu Bakar? What is the Bakar? Veloin Pesach Ba'elim and Akfasim Mizim. A Pesach is brought from either lambs or goats. Mikan Lemosa Pesach Sheila Davar Abamanat Sonu Merabakar. Tell me that the remainder of a Pesach could become a shlomim. Why? Because it says Sonu Bakar. That tells you that the remainder of Pesach, a kind of a Pesach, can be brought for something that's brought in Sonu Bakar. What is it? My new Shlomim. Okay, so that's what that pasuk is for. So how do I know ikuf? How do I know that if that shalol lishma by whether it's shalol lishma meaning shini kodesh or shini balam, that it's ma'akav, that it's no good? How is Pesach different than ola or shlamim or the other ones we said in the Mishnah that it's kosher, just not yotzei if you did it with a shinui? Elam Rav Safra is about the Pesach Rav Nachman. You're right. This last pasuk is after for Rav Nachman's Rasha, right? That's for sure. That a leftover, a remainder of a Pesach becomes a shlam. Shamar's Chodesh Aviv is la mitzvah b'shini kodesh. That's the shini mitzvah. Shamar's Chodesh Aviv is la mitzvah. That right? That it's lechatchila b'shini kodesh. But Martam Zevach Pesach is la mitzvah b'shini ba'alam. Right? Who is la'akev? It says Zevach Pesach who? So the who that it says there is ma'akev. Again, the first pasuk was Shamar's Chodesh Aviv, and the Martam Zevach Pesach, right? Is Martin Zevach Pesach who is Ma'akav Bein Hocha for both Mashkan and Zvicha. Okay, fine. That's for Shchita, because the Zevach Pesach, that's for Shchita by Shini Ba'alam. Shar Avodas, how do I know other Avodas? How do we know Kabbalah, Halacha, and Zrika also that are no good? So the Gemara first is Hol B'Gali Gali. Since you find by Shechting that it's no good, even B'di Avad, it's puzzle. If you did it Shalol Lishma by Shchita, we assume by the other ones too. Rashi is Hol B'Gali Gali. I mean, that's not good enough. Since he's found by Zich, we want to know. Maybe by Shchita, Shalol Lishma is no good even b'diavad. How do we know by the other ones too? Ella, Avodas Minolan. How do we know by the other ones? I'll tell you why. How do we look at In other words, why do we go for Pesach? We started looking for Psukim by Pesach. Shemor's Chodesh Aviv, Martam Zevach Pesach, the Zavachta Shemor's Kech Pesach. What do you mean? Isn't Pesach, we're assuming, in the Havmina, the Gemara, when it started off with these Psukim by Pesach, we said, wait a minute, didn't we have on Dalet Amid Beis that all the Kavanos are mentioned over there? What does the Pasuk say? All the other Kavanos, they're all together. The basic idea that the Chetchilef to be Lishma is learned from Zos Torah, all the Kavanos have to Lechachilef be Lishma. Why do we need a Pasuk Lechachilef by Pesach? We already have a Pasuk. But does that pasuk mention Pesach? Look at it carefully. It doesn't say Pesach. It doesn't say Bechor. It doesn't say Meiser. But the next pasuk says Asher Tziva Hashem Es Moshe V'Har Sinai B'Yom Tzavosos B'nei Yisrael L'Hakivus Karbanehem. The second, the pasuk next to it, which is also a Hekesh, includes the other Karbanos, Pesach, Meiser, and Bechor. Says the Gemara, So first, in the Havmina, when we started from the two dots, Pesach Menon, we thought, well, Pesach's not included in Zos Torah. It's not mentioned over there, right? So we looked for other psukim to tell me Lechatchila and then Bidi Evet. But how do I know about the other ones? So he said, no. Let's go back to the Zos Torah Lo Mincha. Lechatchila, that every carbon has to be Lishma, whether it's the ones in Zos Torah Lo Mincha, Lechatos Lo Hashem Aminuim, that's Lechatchila, but it also includes Karbaneim, the next pasuk, which means Meiser, Pesach, and Bechor. The other ones too. Zos Torah, reading the Gemara now. The very next pasuk that Yom says, Karbaneim, Bechor, Meiser, Pesach, Hikisho Kasul Shlomim. Even Bechor, Meiser, and Pesach, which are included in Karbaneim, is also Mukash, is also juxtaposed to Shlomim. Ma Shlomim, Ben Shiri Kodesh, Ben Shiri Baal, Bin La Mitzvah. Just by Shlom, we saw whether it's Shini Kodesh Shini Baal requires L'Chachila, Avkol, Ben Shini Kodesh, Ben Shini Mitzvah. Right. Now, how do I know La'akiv? How do I know La'akiv? Because we have the other psukim, the psukim that we mentioned before, which we don't need now. or lechatchila, because the lechatchila we have from shlamim. So the other that we mentioned before, Rashi mentioned them. It's sort of in parentheses. Vasisa Pesach and the Martam Zevach Pesach. That's la'akiv. Okay, fine, but that's only by shchita. But now we say like this: ukishlam mashlamim. Just like Shlom, there's no difference between the first procedure of shchita to the other ones. Ben shar avodos lo chalakto ben la mitzvah. Pesach lo chalakto ben zvicha l'shar avodos la'akiv. Since the other psukim are brought down la'akiv by psukim, even though by shini balam it only mentions zavachta shchita, but we'll say just like by Shlom, there's no difference between one procedure and another lechatchila. By Pesach, where we have a pasuk that tells me la'akiv by shchita, the same thing applies to the other procedures too. Says Gemara, Elahu Lomali. So what do I need who for? If I got the first psukim of Shomer Chodesh Ovet and the Amartim Zevach Pesach, what do I need who for? Those psukim are themselves tell me that it's la'akiv. What I need who? Elu for a different Rasha. Look at it, Tanya. Never Pesach who? B'shchita la'akiv, right? It says who by shchita because it says Zevach Pesach who l'shchita la'akiv. When it says who by Oshim, it also says who, but it doesn't say it by Shchita. Even if you didn't do the Kar Simurim, Shalahuk through a Mur of Kasha is Kasha. So therefore, the who that it says by Oshim is not Dafka that the Shchita has to be Lishma. Therefore, we say not like Rebbe Lezer in our Mishnah, but rather like the Tanakama or Mishnah. And when it comes to Oshim, Oshim is just like Ola and Shlamim. If you did it Shalol Lishma, if you shefted Shalol Lishma, it's not puzzle. It's just you're not Yotzei, but it's not like Pesach, which if you did it Shalol Lishma, even the Diavad is puzzle. It's because the Lishma is Ma'akiv by Pesach. What about Chatas? Chatas we'll see tomorrow. Mitzvah Chatas Minol. We'll talk about Chatas tomorrow. Tomorrow again, 5:20, the year-around time, 5:20, because there's no slichas here before the first minyan, only after the first minyan, or in middle of the first minyan, as the case may be. Okay. Then during Aseres Meitshuva, starting on Som Gedalia, 5 o'clock every morning. Mitzvah Shem. Have a good day, everybody. Kultu. Romy, I don't know if you heard that Yossi Adler was nifter, the Levias today here.
Yossi Adler.
Yossi Adler was nifter, Arla's brother. Yeah.
Why? From what? Was he now? Oh, never. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Psora Tova.